In an all-in-one attempt to show the world that I am unproductive, insecure, and susceptible to internet marketing schemes, I have decided to build myself a standing desk. Let's dive right in. To begin this project, I started by digging out scraps and chunks of 8-quarter boards that I had laying around left over from past adventures. One benefit of being an absolute mess is that you are so disorganized that you stumble across treasured boards you didn't even know you had. And while I was collecting these boards, I was shocked by the number of options that I had. I ended up with a diverse collection of mahogany, maple, walnut, ash, cherry, and pecan. Once everything was tossed on my workbench, I just stood there in puzzlement and confusion with a tape measure in my hand, shifting boards around on my bench and waiting for a sign for what in the world I was supposed to do next. When no clear sign came, I decided it would be best to go cut these boards into smaller pieces on the miter saw. I've recently been involved in some mild attempts to clean up my shop wreckage, and in one of these disaster relief efforts, I happened upon this handy-dandy little hold down for my miter saw, which turned out to be incredibly useful for holding the board in place while I cut it with my feet, which freed up my hands to eat my daily portions of oats, saving me both time and energy. I'm honestly rather surprised no one has thought of this idea sooner. It's a perfect way to worry the people who actually care about you, make the safety police uncontrollably angry, and best of all, it just might spark a smile for some silly stranger standing somewhere surveying the subject on their screen. Said slicing was safely secured, so I swiftly sought the service of a second saw, that is, the table saw. I'm not one who is very good at following instructions or plans, so I opted to just go with what I was imagining in my head. So despite it looking like I was just randomly and recklessly slicing and dicing for the last minute and a half, I actually ended up with an assortment of chunks that sort of fit together once I laid them out on my workbench. Once the basic layout was done, it was time to get all the pieces milled flat and square. So the milling process was actually quite straightforward and simple. I'm going to skim through it very quickly because there's nothing particularly abnormal about it. The one thing that I would do differently if I were to do it again is I wouldn't skip plane the boards. After a quick break and a Google search, I came to the realization that for several years now I have been using the term skip planing wrong. I do not mean skip planing, I mean flipping the board over between each pass to hopefully get parallel faces. This method is usually hit or miss and only really works if you start out with boards that are already very close to parallel, which is why in hindsight I wish that I had used the joiner to clean up one face before sending it through the planer. Speaking of the joiner, there it is in all of its very small glory. And only after I had planed down both sides of all of the boards did I turn to the joiner. And the reason I regret using the planer for both sides was because even though they came very close to parallel, the boards were still a little bit wavy and wobbly. Luckily I was able to pull them all together in a later step, but if I were to do this again I definitely would have had a higher focus on the joiner. After I ran them over the joiner, I took it to the table saw to get the fourth and final side of these boards squared up. Now, even though I'm only showing you a handful of clips from each process, I do this to all of the boards. And once this was done to all of the boards, it was time to break out my phone with a reference picture from before and try to organize these boards how they would be laid out in the final assembly. With the entire desk laid out, I divided the pieces into smaller groups and marked reference lines for the biscuit joiner, in accordance with my first set of glue-ups. A couple of the ends need to be cleaned up, so I did that over at the miter saw, and after that was done, I could start administering the biscuit joiner. Hold it right there, sister. Remember when I was trying to explain my complaints about the way that I planed down these boards? This is the result of it. Notice that gap between the top two boards where you can see light and even see my orange sweatshirt peeking through? That is the result of my lazy planing techniques. Everyone likes to run their mouths about Festool dominoes, and I'm sure Festool dominoes are wonderful. But until someone either sends me one for free, I rob a bank, or I marry into money, I will not have a Festool domino in the shop. The reason I bring up Festool dominoes is for a lot of tasks, a $60 biscuit joiner will do close to or as good of a job as a Festool domino. Now, chances are, if this video gets more than about 100 or 150 views, there will be someone shouting in the comments saying things like, "Mortise and tenon! What about floating tenons?" And that's really too advanced for me. I don't really understand what they're all yapping about. But for me, the only thing I would use a Festool domino for at this point would be to keep tabletops and large flat glue-ups flat and perfectly aligned. And for me personally, my Wen biscuit joiner that I bought 3 years ago for $40 does just the trick. There's no need to go out and spend $1,200 on a fancy name brand tool. Now that I've just successfully completed a very long, insecure rant about how my cheap tools are actually far better than expensive tools I wish I had, I feel like I need to clear a few things up. It would be absolutely great to have a Festool domino. That would be awesome to have in the shop. I could brag to everyone I know about it, and it would be really fun to use. I also have absolutely nothing against Festool. I just think biscuit joiners deserve more credit than they are getting. With all the glue-ups from round 1 out of the clamps, I cleaned up a few edges on the table saw, and then it was time to break out the phone again and arrange the pieces in accordance with the reference picture I had taken at the beginning of this project. The second round of glue-ups was almost identical to the first one, so for that reason I'm not going to waste a bunch of your time explaining every step. It was the same as the first go-round. The one thing you'll notice is that I'm using my air hose to clean out the sawdust left in the recesses that were made by the biscuit joiner. This is completely unnecessary. I'm just doing it because my air compressor is a new tool, so I'm finding fun and unnecessary ways to use it. Here lie the results of the second round of glue-ups, and I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do next, so I decided my best option would be place one of the pieces at the very edge of my workbench. Oh, great heavens! Now that that was out of the way, I could lay all the pieces out in the desk configuration for the third or fourth time this project, and then contemplate what to do next. The golden rule of doing things is when in doubt, start chopping. And that rule isn't just restricted to woodworking, it can be applied to all areas of life. But in this instance, I used it in woodworking to determine that my next step was to chop off the uneven ends on the miter saw to prepare for my third round of glue-ups. Now I've already rambled about how handy biscuit joiners are for keeping glue-ups flat, and how convenient a Festool domino would be at performing the same task, but there's a third option that you probably haven't even considered, and that is a sword. It's a nice medium in price between the biscuit joiner and the domino, and it can also be handy in the event of a robbery. I have a select few very loyal viewers who I don't actually even know in real life, but appear in the comment section of almost all of my videos. This gang will probably remember back in the day when I would actually frequently upload videos, I would almost always include a quote from Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu. I have just discovered that he had a super cousin of sorts named Lao Tzu, and he once said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step." This isn't exactly 1,000 miles, but it is the second largest thing I've ever built, and there was no one who was breathing down my back or paying me lots of money to finish it, so at times there was very little motivation to complete it. That's how editing this video has felt as well. I opted to complete the project before even starting to edit, so now I have hours upon hours of low quality videography to sort through, and it's been quite tedious. Just occasionally, I'll stumble across something I don't even remember doing, which is precisely what we have here. Ah! What is going on? Despite my best efforts to rack my brain and try to figure out what was going on in that clip, I still, to this day, have no idea what was going on. I don't even remember that ever happening. Despite it being out of frame, I'm pretty sure I had a rolling cart that I bumped into. But why I had such a strong reaction from just slowly bumping into a rolling cart, I cannot understand. This one I do remember. I put my planer on my table saw to set up to plane these boards down, only to realize one of the boards was 12.5 inches wide. Too wide for the planer. I didn't want to take the planer down, so instead I broke out my trusty old Wen hand planer and planed the edge of the board down until it was only 12 inches wide. This wasn't exactly a great example of work smarter, not harder, because working smarter would have just been not putting something large on the table saw until you're done using the table saw. Alright, so after countless hours of shenanigans and somewhere between 20 and 25 separate glue-ups, I finally had everything together into 3 long boards that were just under 12 inches wide that I could feed through my planer. Now, as will be exemplified in a future video, I haven't the slightest understanding how electricity works. I just know that when you plug a tool into the wall and then try to turn it turns on. And if you plug too many tools into the same wall and turn them all on at the same time, sometimes everything stops working.
Ah, that's a nuisance! Keep breaking the electricity! Ah, I need to stop breaking the electricity.
Here is another quote from Lao Tzu. "Whoever talks a lot often fails, and I've been yapping for about 12 minutes straight now, without ever really stopping, so it was my time to fail. And I kicked off this failure over at the table saw, where I attempted to clean up and straighten out the edges of these boards to prepare to glue them all up into one desktop. It didn't go very well. Here's Real-Time Ryan."
Alright, so the time has come to glue all 3 of these boards together in one big desktop panel. The only problem is they're not ready to be glued together because I can't get a good jointing edge on both the boards where they meet. Now, that issue comes from both my own carelessness and the fact that my joiner is very small, and I'm not very good at using a joiner. So what I'm going to try now is I put a 1/4 inch bit in my router. I'm going to set up this piece of plywood here as a sort of guiding fence. Then I'm going to route a groove that is along the seam of the 2 boards, cutting each side at the same time, which will hopefully make for a perfect fit. Now the only problem with that is these boards are 2 inches thick, and there's no way this trim router is going to cut 2 inches thick in one pass, let alone several passes. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to cut a slot or a groove and then come back with a flush trim bit in my big router and try to clean it up. I have no idea if this is going to work. This probably just confused you a great deal unless you've done something just like this before. So just keep watching and it'll probably make sense. Maybe. Or leave this video now. That's probably your best option. Just leave and never come back. Probably do that. Onward. That did not work.
After a very foolish and unsuccessful attempt using the router, it was time to rack my brain and try to come up with some other way to get a perfect jointed edge on both of these boards. Now I did briefly go back to the table saw and try to clean them up on the table saw, The problem is my table saw fence is not long enough or strong enough to support these boards throughout the entire cut. So that didn't really get me anywhere. And what I ended up doing was essentially the same thing that I just attempted with the router, only this time with the circular saw. The circular saw is a lot more powerful and a lot quicker of a cut, so there was less time for me to mess things up. The circular saw couldn't cut quite deep enough, so I cleaned up the rest of it using a flush trim bit in my router table. Well, I'm pleased to announce that the circular saw actually did quite well. All the gaps are closed up. Maybe there's a 30-second in one place or another, but I am confident that I can pull that together with the clamps without any lasting damage. And I think that I did the best I could do given the circs. Alright, time for the very last glue up of this project. And I actually failed to videotape any of my biscuit joining endeavors for this. So instead, here's a video of me practicing my swordsmanship skills with a broom. This glue roller was something that I felt like a fool for purchasing initially, but has turned out to be extremely useful. I was at my local woodcraft and I espied it and was like, yes! Spreading glue has always been such a tedious and difficult task. This is bound to fix all my problems. And then I spent like $15 on a silly little Play-Doh roller branded as a glue roller. My whole car ride home I was regretting the choices that I made. Spreading glue was never really difficult to begin with. But then I used the thing and it was like I was a new man. Tasks that would usually take 30 seconds now took 7. And after I was done, my hands wouldn't be covered in glue. In all seriousness, that glue roller was a purchase that surprised me at how much it speeds things up, especially on large glue ups like this, or batches of cutting boards. Not only that, but it also has me just ever so slightly more inclined to go build stuff, knowing that there is no need for me to get glue all over my hands and feet during the application process.
Oh, hey!
I occasionally complain about these Bessie clamps because I find them finicky and difficult to work with. However, they are absolutely crucial in tasks like this, because they have what everyone on Earth so desperately craves: unmatched squeezing abilities.
Nice. Onward.
You'll notice that my lips are moving in this clip, but there's no audio. That's because I was running my mouth about something that I have since decided was not important enough to include in the video.
Yes. Nice and flat. Oh, you beauty. That is perfectly flat.
You will have probably noticed that when I squared up the desk with the circular saw in the last clip, it uncovered these previously hidden biscuits. And to fix that problem, I'm just going to do a really simple inlay to try to cover it up. I actually still had the cut-off pieces, so I just cut a small block out of that would cover the ugly patch, and utilized routers and chisels and implements of destruction to carve out a recess to then glue that small block into. This is definitely a tedious task and something that took quite a while to fix, but one thing that I've come to really enjoy about woodworking is the problem-solving aspect of it. And lucky for me, I'm really good at the problem-creating aspect of it. So I get unlimited opportunities to do the things I enjoy. The next 10 seconds of sanding you see is actually a representation of about 4 hours of sanding. Sanding is really boring, and this video is already super long, far longer than any of my other videos on my channel. And I'm not going to waste your time with endless sanding, most beautiful and most wonderful. I also don't want to waste time editing sanding, because I got a comment from PCC4233 on my only community post on my channel, essentially chasing me down, telling me they were waiting for new videos. And it really confuses me why someone would be that interested or invested in my nonsense. So now I'm rushing to get this one done to please this strange soul. There were a few knot holes in some of the walnut, so I just blew all the dust out of it with my air hose, and then I applied the remnants of a melted popsicle to the holes. Fate has one guarantee, and we all must agree that the best laid plans may all change by tomorrow. So as a reminder of this, I'm going to inlay this piece of wood that was previously a pen blank into my desk. This was quite similar to the inlay that fixed the biscuit problem, but I took a little bit more time to make sure that the fit was super snug and that there were no visible gaps. The fit might have been too tight because I had to attack it with a hammer for several minutes to get it to fit in place. Obviously, this thing is nowhere near flat or flush with the rest of the desk. So to fix this problem, I'm actually going to break out the handsaw. But before I break out the handsaw, I applied some blue tape just so that I wouldn't tear up the rest of the desk with the saw teeth. Now, whenever I use this handsaw, it's about 50-50 if I'm going to cut my hand or not. I think I've used it all of about 6 times, and 3 out of those 6 times I've ended up with my finger all bloody and battered. Luckily, today was my lucky day, and I did not cut off any of my fingers with this saw. I think my problem is that I just let my guard down when I'm using hand tools, because it seems unlikely that I'll just cut off an entire limb. So I end up slicing myself slightly a whole lot more.
Right there.
I opted to use the most inefficient tool of all time to clean up the edges that overhung the edge of the desk, and that was a chisel. And while it might look pretty cool, this took me like 10 minutes. Once I had completed making a big fool out of myself using the chisel, I switched over to the sander to clean it up the rest of the way. And this worked a lot better. So the desk base for this project I actually ordered online, and usually it costs around $250, but with the help of some unnecessary tricks and some coupon codes and the fact that it was Black Friday, I ended up paying only about $130 for it. I put it together in the span of some 30 minutes, and then I put it on top of the underside of the desk to mark the locations for my threaded inserts. I don't really have much to say about the threaded inserts process besides that what you're seeing is a total scam. I actually spent like 2 hours fighting with it because I started off using the wrong drill bits and drilling the wrong depths, so it actually was quite a battle, but you just see a very condensed version. I believe I've mentioned this in videos of days gone by, but I know absolutely nothing about spraying finish. I just buy a $10 finish spraying gun from Harbor Freight and then just spray it in the air until the desk seems adequately covered. So if there's one helpful tip about spraying finishes you can learn from this video, it's go somewhere else to try to learn anything. Don't copy anything I do, and I wouldn't exactly recommend spraying finish inside of your shop because you just get a very thin layer of finish on all of your tools. The finish spraying went surprisingly well, and as usual, this is a very condensed version of what I actually did. I actually did about 3 or 4 coats of finish on both the top and the bottom, but I'm only showing you the first coat because that's the most drastic change. I actually do have one tip that you can take away from the finishing process of this video, and that is, once the finish has cured, buff it out. I know there are plenty of people that use all sorts of fancy buffing machines and buffing waxes, and I'm sure that achieves a better finished result than what I do, but I'm really happy with just some brown paper. Alright, as we draw close to the 25-minute mark, I want to just take a moment to give a shout out to you, the viewer, for sticking with me this whole time. It's been a very pleasant build. I really enjoyed making something for myself, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. And I've learned you miss all the shots you don't take, so I'm going to take a shot. If you would like me to build you a desk like this, or really anything else, fire me an email. A desk like this I would probably sell for around $1,200, But that price could obviously go up or down depending on customization levels and what type of wood we use. And I'm in a fun little midlife crisis where I don't really know what I'm doing with my life, and I am more than happy to build people stuff and have them pay me money. So if that's you, do not hesitate to fire me an email, even if you're not entirely confident what you want or if you want me to build it. And now it's time for the absolutely necessary last step in building any piece of furniture. The Will It Hold Me challenge. And not only will it hold me, but will it lift me?
Now I'm up in the sky.
Thanks be unto you for watching this entire video. I have no idea when the next video will be, so until then, go do things.